Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you're enjoying the day so far as much as I certainly am. We've had some great sessions already this morning and lots of food for thought. We've got plenty more brilliant speakers in store for you, and the next one I know you're going to really enjoy. We're going to do this a little differently as well. This session is not going to be so much of a presentation but more of a conversation. So please, as Damon and I are talking through things, do add your questions to the conversation as well as we talk things through. This session is in partnership with the Ozone Project, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about them before we get started. The Ozone Project is a digital advertising platform which was created for brands by the UK's leading publishers, including News UK, The Guardian, The Telegraph and Reach. So collectively, that means it reaches a whopping 99.6% of the nation's online adults. It's a very, very different organisation, which was created to offer advertisers brand safe, data compliant and effective digital advertising solutions, and to do it in a way which is simple and easy for advertisers. And Ozone exists to address some of those issues that play on today's marketers' minds when it comes to the often complex and tricky to understand world of digital advertising. The digital supply chain often disintermediates the advertiser and the content creator. So Ozone's collaboration was founded by News UK, The Guardian and Reach, and then subsequently joined by other lifestyles and news brands to change that. So today, when we were putting together this session and thinking about how we could help our members and the audience today when looking at simplifying and demystifying the world of digital advertising today, there seemed like no better choice of person to join us than Ozone's CEO, Damon Reeve. And I know from the conversations he and I have had already that we're in for a treat today and we're going to learn so much. Damon's the chief architect of the Ozone Project, and he's previously spent over 20 years in digital advertising, launching and scaling and selling all kinds of advertising technology businesses, including Unanimous and OpenX. And it was when Damon set up Authenticated Digital that he focused on the need to understand the dynamics of quality in the world of programmatic advertising. And it's a journey that highlighted professional publishers and content creators being disadvantaged perhaps by a market that treated any ad on any website, irrespective of the quality of the content that it sat in. So it was this thinking, I know, that led to Damon creating the Ozone Project. And it's a platform that ultimately gives those publishers more control over their business by offering advertisers total transparency and choice over where their advertising then appears. Today, Damon and I are going to talk about the topic of demystifying digital advertising. And I'm particularly interested in talking about the marketeer's role in shaping an ecosystem for the future. Do give us lots of questions as we go. Don't forget you can post those on chat or Slido or Slido, I never know how to pronounce it, and we can ask those at the end. So please everybody join me in welcoming Damon to our virtual screen. Hello Damon.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And I know, Damon, that yesterday you were swimming in the sea, so I hope you're fully refreshed for this chat today. Was it very, very cold down in Cornwall?
It was very cold, but the sun was shining, so it wasn't all bad.
Brilliant. Well, let's start with a simple question for you. When we're looking at this area, tell us, why does change need to happen?
So everyone has probably heard over the course of, well, since January last year, that Chrome, Google's Chrome web browser, is discontinuing support for third-party cookies, which immediately sounds a little bit boring and technical, but actually has a profound impact on the digital advertising industry that we have today. The cookies are primarily the lifeblood of the data that almost all companies use today to drive digital display or digital advertising. So there are going to be a huge amount of changes. Unfortunately, the way in which it is often messaged is very technical, and immediately eyes glaze over and people want to do something else. But the truth is, it's actually pretty important. But it also, in and of itself, is not something in isolation. There have been a number of sort of contributors or signals that change has been needed for quite a number of years. So the first one that I would probably sort of point out is, which is not unrelated, is GDPR, that came into effect in summer 2018. And that was really the regulators, data regulators in Europe, saying that they weren't happy with the amount of personal data that is used in the internet in various industries, and things need to change. Consumers felt slightly less concerned, but still important. And then you've got the competition regulators, who are now increasingly starting to ask a lot more questions about digital advertising and how it evolves and develops, and by whom. And then the final one, and probably the best example of this, is practitioners, being advertisers and publishers, and the sort of persistent issues that they've experienced as the digital advertising market has evolved. And I'd probably point to PwC ISBA report that came out mid last year. There was a study with a number of leading brands and leading publishers to understand supply paths, supply chain effectiveness. And they called out some pretty sort of damning examples of things and why they needed to change, just from a business and economics point of view. So the trigger for all of this change is the change to third-party cookies. But I think that there's a lot more that sits behind that change.
Yeah, but clearly a big amount of change. And I know we're going to come on later to talk about the cookieless world, but also everything else that's happening in the context of that is so important. So how do we demystify this? How can we, really understand what to do about this and how to deal with it in a better way?
So I guess the starting point is, if we accept that things have to change, then the next question is, well, how and what actually needs to change? And there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. We could treat change, as in the third-party cookies going away, in isolation, and say that we need to come up with tactical solutions for being able to replace whatever it did before. And there'd be initiatives that we can talk about in a sec, but there's initiatives around how you target audiences in digital, how you measure and attribute value, how systems interoperate. Those are the sort of the primary uses of third-party cookie data, apart from insights and learning and planning and stuff like that. But then I guess there's a slightly broader question of, the cumulative effect of some of the other reasons for change mean that it is actually much more systemic. And if they need to change, then this is an opportunity to change things for a much more sustainable future, that are much more in the interests of brands and publishers and primary stakeholders. And then, and the biggest part of that, which I guess is probably one of the reasons why we're talking, is the role that publishers and brands can play in that change. So obviously I come from the publisher world, and the publishers, news publishers, through Ozone, invested in proactively pushing for change a number of years ago. And to some extent, there's a rally cry to maybe not do the same, but to get the same level of engagement on the brand side, and seeing that advertisers play a crucial, if not pivotal role in architecting that better future.
That's really important and interesting for us to think about, the responsibility of the advertisers, the marketeers, to be able to be the ones that lead that change and make it all happen. I want to come on to thinking about what questions we should ask around that as well. I just want to pause for a moment. I know that what we thought we might do as well is just ask a few questions of the audience. So I think there's a couple of polls about to appear on screen in a second as well, because I'm interested in what our audience are thinking. Whether us marketeers, they're ever intimidated by the specialist knowledge of digital advertising agencies or partners. And are you aware of every channel that your ads might run on if you're running a TV ad? And also, if you're buying a digital campaign, are you aware of all the sites your ads might run on? Interesting to see what our audience think about that, so we can get a sense of how clear it is for everybody. So some questions popping up on your screen, everybody. We'd love to hear from you. Please do fill in that poll so we can respond to some of those questions and share them as Damon and I go. Because I certainly think one of the things we see with all the pressure that's on marketeers at the moment, they're so busy. There is so much on their mind, and it's very easy for things to run amok as well. So it'll be interesting to see the responses from that poll. Okay. So can I ask then, if we're thinking about our audience and what they're wanting to do, what sort of questions do you think they should be asking themselves, their agency and their digital partners?
Yeah, so it's hard, right? Because everyone's busy, everyone's got a lot to do, and we choose partners and agencies to work with because they are the sort of domain specialists, and that's true in every sort of part of our business, on the publisher side included. The challenge is that the ecosystem that we have today is in a large part designed, in large part is the way it is because I'm going to say arguably over delegated responsibility for what it should look like to partners and vendors. So we sit back, we say, right, will you tell us kind of what you think, and then we'll decide whether we like it or not. Now, the output of that is when those partners produce great product, and I'm sort of I guess referencing the bigger tech platforms here. It's very easy for us to just go yes, not engage in the detail, and buy the product, and it creates kind of perceived value. Well, it creates real value, but it's very much packaged. The point at which things are not necessarily going the way that we thought. So we start to have brand safety issues. There are transparency issues. And we would like things to be done a certain way. All of a sudden, we're feeling, we're very much disconnected from the actual process of what drives things forward. And publishers experience this as much as I'm sure brands do. And then we have a problem, because if the publishers and the brands and the consumers are actually quite disintermediated from each other, and we don't have the same direct relationship that maybe we did or we do in other media channels, our ability to influence and affect change is significantly hampered. The only way that we can change that is to engage, ask questions. If we don't understand things, keep asking questions. And it's quite often true that, it's no doubt that digital advertising is complicated, but there's a big part of it where we allow it to be complicated. And the complexity is used in some respects as a way of being able to divide and conquer people a little bit. And I'm very much of the view that if people can't break things down into simple concepts and explain them clearly, then that's not on you for not being able to understand it. It's on them for not being able to articulate it correctly.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way of putting it, and so important for everybody, because, and you do get it. You get people who clearly want to play smoke and mirrors about things and overcomplicate what's happening to make people in marketing not feel like they know what's happening, to make them feel like it's ridiculously complicated. But the skill of people who can explain things in the right language and in the right terms, the way in which you're talking to me about it, it feels a lot simpler, but that requires some courage, I think, and I guess that requires the right people to be able to be the intermediaries and to help translate, if you like.
It does, and it also requires trust. It requires real trust between the partner and the marketer to know that you're getting the answers that you're expecting. And I guess there are a number of examples, but the one I'd probably call out here is in the PwC ISBA report last year, where what the average number of websites that campaigns ran across, and this was the top 16 brands involved in the study, and many of them are probably on this call now. The average number of websites that their campaigns ran on was over 40,000. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really have more than probably a dozen to 20 sites that I would visit regularly, and I probably have about 100 in my total history. So I fail to understand where 40,000 actually come from. The challenge is, I suspect that if any of those agencies actually ask if any of those brands ask their agencies to run a report of where their ads are actually appearing, the truth is, with the tools that we have today, it's not possible. So immediately we have a problem with the tools and the development of the tools that we have in front of us, where we can't even answer quite a simple question, which is, where are my ads appearing? So this is where, without asking those questions, without engaging, without pushing back and saying this is not acceptable, I expect this, then there's not really an incentive on the parts of either the technologies providers or of the agents to need to change. And I think that that's where the onus is on us as a group. When I'm saying us generally, in terms of the primary stakeholders being the publishers and the brands, to engage, to ask the right questions, and to not take no for an answer.
Yeah, but very clearly there is then, that we can't just be responsive to making things happen, but we need to be responsible about making sure that it's being done in the right way and that we're moving in the right direction around that. But it is an extra challenge for advertisers to make sure that they've got that responsibility. Is it all bad? Is it all?
Oh, it's definitely not all bad. I mean, I think, it's there are some amazing kind of achievements and not only within digital advertising, but within sort of the platforms and the technologies we use. I mean, there's a huge amount of efficiency that's being created. There's changes in business process. There are changes in business models. There's a lot of direct-to-consumer brands that didn't exist before, programmatic advertising existed. There's a lot of marketing that used to be siloed within classifieds and stuff like that now mean that plumbers, electricians, florists, have the ability to reach consumers in a completely different way. So it's a lot of it is fantastic. I think it's important to understand, what are the great bits and where have we gone wrong and what can we do about it. And I think that despite change sort of being thrust upon us as all of this third-party data goes away, we should actually see this as a good thing and an opportunity, because there's been a frustration for a while, probably led by quite a few people here, where there's been an overuse of, I'm going to say, sort of tech metrics and digital data, and the sort of emphasis on what's called deterministic, detailed data in digital relative to other media channels, which then drives an overuse of those metrics. So you end up finding that a branding campaign or a branding strategy gets reduced down to direct response measures of success. Now everyone knows broadly that that's just not really right, but because the data is there, we have a kind of a tendency to want to use it. So there's an opportunity now to say, well, if the data is not going to be there, then let's have a bit of a rethink as to what value is our digital spend driving and why. I think there are enough case studies out there now, the notable one being Adidas, who sort of point to the damage to their own brand and what happens when they overuse and have an overemphasis on direct response metrics and strategy, and not a big enough investment in brand. While ever digital was a sort of a small or a minor channel in the marketing mix, those kind of concerns probably aren't necessarily as important. But now digital is the biggest channel, and search is the biggest part of that digital channel. Search will always be primarily direct response. So how do we balance out the rest of our digital spend to make sure that we've got a good mix of campaign strategies that are through the user funnel, from branding and awareness through to direct response?
That's so interesting. Yeah, it feels like a moment in time for everybody to reevaluate and to look at that holistic picture. Yeah, it'd be interesting to come back if we have time to talking about the Adidas case study, but certainly the to understand what the risk is if we don't look at this in the right way, as well as you say, there's some great opportunities out there, and this is a moment to reevaluate. Now I'm interested to see if we can, I don't know if Elise and the team can share the poll results, just out of interest, to see how our audience responded to our questions. Maybe it's all clear and it's all fine. Do we have the poll responses that we can share with everybody? Don't know if they're ready yet. There we go. So let's have a look and see what people have said. Are you ever intimidated by the specialist knowledge of your digital advertising agencies or partners? 67% of the people said some of the time, and 18% a lot of the time. So it's still very, very high there, isn't it, Damon?
Yeah.
And yeah, so interesting. So digital campaigns, 58% are not aware of all the sites versus only 24% of the channels for TV. Would you be willing, so we wanted to get on to talking about a question of ethics and what's happening with data, but 67% of people would be willing to pay 20% more, which is a lot, for using consumer data that's been collected and used ethically. Interesting, thank you, audience. And what is most likely to prevent you from being a digital advertising change maker, investing your budgets more fairly and ethically? And the overwhelming issue there is lack of knowledge. How interesting, 48%. So some interesting responses coming through from there. Any particular observations? Does any of that surprise you, Damon?
I guess the first, or could we just pop it up again so I could see the results? Oh, there we go. I mean, I guess it's encouraging that less than 20% of people are only intimidated a lot of the time. That's good, right? Because I think that knowledge is I think, I don't know whether this is going to sound right. I feel like a lot of the time, non-digital marketing CMOs underestimate the importance or the value that they bring to the broader discussion around what needs to change in digital. I think that there's a real sort of echo chamber that exists within digital practitioners, and people will kind of always want to revert to what they know. So it's important to have a broader view of things. I have some of the most enjoyable conversations I have is with people that are outside of digital, but are very kind of good, either general CMOs or kind of have domain expertise in other channels, because then you get to reconcile some of the differences. And knowledge should not be a reason for not being able to engage and be a change maker. I think it's a matter of asking the right questions and having confidence in the knowledge that you do have. The question of paying more for ethically sort of sourced data, there's a growing trend, which I think is really interesting, about the way in which change happens, not just change itself. There was a time when change was important, or if change was required, you just get on and do it, and it was quite transactional. But I think we're operating now in a slightly different sort of, I guess, set of considerations where how you do what you do is almost as important as what you do. There's been a lot of discussion sort of recently about data specifically, and the WFA released a report I think 18 months ago by Jamie Barnardson at Unilever around data ethics. And I think the principal takeaway there is just because you can use data in a particular context doesn't necessarily mean you should. And I think that sort of draws a parallel between, the right way to do business, whether or not you legally are allowed to. And I think in the world of data, which is very confusing and difficult to understand, I think it's a fairly relevant and sort of pertinent point. It's important to us, the questions around how audience data is sourced, its provenance, and knowing whether or not it works for you, I guess, in your campaigns, is part of that consideration.
And this is so interesting, because we're getting into, you know, some fundamental principles about what type of marketer you need to be and what you need to do. So that how you do what you do is as important as what you do right now. I think that's a really clear takeaway for us all when we're thinking about data and ethics. And I'm fascinated because, you know, we've been talking all year with Marketing Society members and the marketers I speak to about this idea of how can we be the change makers that we want to see. Marketeers have always been change makers. It's what we do. We change opinions, we change behaviors, but understanding how we can move fast but in the right direction is, I know, on a lot of people's minds. And clearly what we're talking about here is one of the biggest barriers to that is knowledge and understanding around data. What else could those of us listening do if they want to be marketing leaders who want to drive change and in the right way? What other questions should we be asking ourselves, or what else could we be doing?
I think so. The place that I would start is really understanding at a business level, not necessarily at a digital marketing level, how do I define success? What does success look like for me? And how do I evaluate that across my business? When I get to my digital spend and the partners that I'm working with in the digital channel, are the incentives and the measures that I'm giving them aligned to my business metrics? And I think that this is, it's the measures of success and whether my partners are aligned behind those, I feel like is the most important piece to get right from a marketer's point of view. What we see often, and actually a lot of the feedback we get from agencies when we do sort of group sessions on Ozone, is I would love you to do this session with my clients, because we hear and understand what it is that you're saying, but we're incentivized in different ways. So if the partners are being incentivized to bring down the cost per engagement or the cost per click, or, you know, quite often metrics that can be misleading, it's difficult to then talk about the provenance of audience in different environments, because the incentive will always be to push for cost over value.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really important insight in terms of where the responsibility lies. You know, and there will be people listening, you know, who are agency side and people listening who are client side, and that understanding of the shared responsibility, but also, you know, who's being incentivized by what and the decisions we make personally. I think it's fascinating. I guess it's also that sense of are we following or are we leading what's happening, because this change is accelerating so fast now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you another example. So without sort of going on to a sales pitch for Ozone, but we largely work with news and magazine publishers. I mean, that is our sort of expertise, and consumers within those environments are much more engaged in the content that they're consuming than they may be in other media channels. As a result, awareness, brand awareness, recall, measures whenever we do brand studies always massively over-index compared to other kind of media channels. But right now we don't have a currency or a way of being able to sort of consistently measure the effect of cost per engagement or cost per attention. Principally, people are driving towards a cost per click or a cost per thousand metric, which will always push spend to the other 40,000 websites that are quite often in those campaigns, because for whatever reason, the environment is unknown, but it seems to drive those metrics. And I think that if and I don't know whether anyone's ever done this, I'd actually love to see a list of what those 40,000 websites look like and actually see them for myself, maybe not all of them, because I suspect that if we then ran brand studies and engagement studies and brand recall studies across those, I don't think that we'd necessarily get the right outcome, which then comes back to the original question of, if the whole purpose of what we do here is to capture consumer attention and hopefully drive them towards consideration of our brand, we want to make sure that we're not driving the tech metrics to reach an outcome and at the same time missing the point.
It's the classic thing of, choosing what you measure and setting those goals and the difference it can make. I remember, I think Richard Shotton once shared the brilliant example, and maybe it's from Dave Trott's book, so forgive me if I'm misattributing it, but the example of the Dead Sea Scrolls, where people were incentivized to bring in by the number of parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls that they brought in when they were discovering them. So of course what they did was break up all the Dead Sea Scrolls that existed into smaller pieces, because then they got more money for it. Going back to that classic important first step of what are we measuring and what are we incentivizing people behind, and really thinking about it, seems that that's such an important part of the long-term responsibility for advertisers.
Yeah,
really
great.
tricky.
There's a question that Liesl sort of put into the chat, client, which I think is probably worth picking up on. She's saying that digital native companies are more careful about the data, the ethics of the data that they use, and better understand the risks. I think there is there's a point here about I guess the maturity around data and how it's used that is probably important, and it speaks to the intimidation, about understanding the information and the channel itself. Because it's true, I think a lot of digital native companies, those that are born within a digital environment, are their starting point is one that doesn't have a legacy. So they're starting in a digital only world. And so that's the way that their sort of businesses are focused. So other companies and sort of brands need to probably feel like they're playing a bit of catch up. I guess the only thing I would say is, while that's true, the catch up path is not nearly as long or confusing or complex as what it may seem. Reaching a level of understanding to know what's important and what to emphasize can happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, so there's catching up. And I'm conscious that, one of the things we always talk about as a society is, the ability to learn from each other, and what an accelerating power that has, the stories of who's doing it well, as well as understanding from experts. Are there easy ways in which for us to understand which brands are doing it well and what they're doing? I mean, are there examples and places we can go to find that out?
It probably, in my experience, it's more anecdotal. So I would guess, conferences like this and sort of learning from others, I would say, is probably the place that I would go to hear case studies and hear what others have done. Certainly, within the work that we do, we have direct engagements with a lot of brands, and I'd say different brands are at different sort of levels of maturity and engagement. So some of the call outs would be people like Lloyd's, Vodafone, Tesco, who have done it, and P&G, who have engaged heavily in their own sort of path and understanding what drives value for their businesses. But there are many others that are sort of not that far behind. So I think, for me, I don't think there's a sort of a central place to learn and understand. I think it's more in at conferences and hearing case studies and talking amongst each other.
But I think it's really good to hear the examples of those people who are investing and understanding this properly and what they're doing. And interestingly, some are digitally native and some have just accelerated their learning and their understanding and are committed to it, which is great. So if I'm just trying to, there's so much we're talking about here today. I want to unpack it to make it as simple as possible for us all. If there are people listening who want to make sure they're remembering, three important pillars coming out of this, what would be the three things that you would give them to make them feel optimistic that they can demystify this and simplify it?
Engage, ask questions, understand that everyone can make a difference, and the starting point very much is with the CMO and the marketing team. So the only sort of poor question is the one that's never asked. And if you feel like you don't understand the answer, then ask the question again. Like, I think it's really important to keep pushing the partners that we work with and the vendors that we work with to be able to work in our best interests and make sure that we're driving things forward in the way that we need them to be. So that's the first one, ask the questions and engage. The second is, I do think that generally speaking, we're stronger together. A lot more sharing of experience, case studies and stuff like that, and coming on to forums like this to be able to share learning and knowledge, that helps everyone move forward. I think that people learn from each other's experience, and too often learning today is centralized within tech vendors and agencies, and a lot of it, in my observation, is a lot of that is very couched and very cautious. But the truth is, it's important that people talk more and learn, and we learn what worked and what didn't work. So one of the things that we're doing is we're going to start, as of next month, at Ozone, starting to publish a lot of the stuff that we are working on, and we're also going to be clear about what's not working. There's the only way I think that we're ever going to move forward. Otherwise, we will then be taking information that's handed to us primarily by Google, is what it is right now, but others that I just don't think helps us learn. I think it sort of guides us in a single direction. The third one, I guess, is a consideration that how we do things and how we move the market forward is as important as what we actually move forward.
Yeah, the how, not the what. But that's great. It's really interesting to hear about you open sourcing the learnings a little bit as well. I mean, that's really helpful for bringing everybody together. And of course, I'm going to completely agree with the principle that we can do more together. It's the heart of the society. It's the heart of everything I believe, that actually when we come together, engaging through trade bodies, industry groups, working together, that there's more that can be done. And I think the message that's coming out to me is this is very much the ethics, not regulation. We can't wait for that stage, that we've got to do something. Is that the message for people as well?
Yeah, I think so. And because we're in the business now of wanting to create sustainable change. I think that we've had the first sort of I'm not sure how long it is, 10, 15, maybe even longer years of programmatic advertising, where it's all been about scale and growth and seeing how fast we can run. Things are being forced to change, and that's fine. I think for very good reasons in most cases. Now's an opportunity to think about sustainable change. And that's where it now falls to us to make sure that we architect that.
Yeah, we're the ones that make a difference. And I'm fascinated, understanding a bit more about Ozone and how it works, because it is such a different organization, and I've started to understand it across the last few months with you guys. What do you feel, and I know this isn't something we said we'd talk about, but I'm just interested, Damon, what do you feel is the next big priority for you as Ozone, and what do you feel proud of that you're doing as a collective right now?
Well, the biggest one, the biggest sort of, I guess, change that, and the reason why we created Ozone, was to bring to life the value that premium publisher audiences offer. If you characterize the first wave of the programmatic industry, was very much about disconnecting audience from inventory, trading that inventory in open market systems, where an MPU on The Guardian has the same value or similar value to an MPU on some blogging site from, I'm going to say Nepal, I don't know why I said that. But the value of the audience has been completely disconnected. And I think that we know that that's the value that premium publishers offer. It's just not valued today. So all of the discussions that people have been having about the changes that are coming through with third-party cookies are really going to drive interest and a focus on first-party data, of which that's one of the things that publisher audiences offer. It still has to get to market. It still has to be something that is packaged and available for buyers. So bringing that to market, that's what we set out to do 2.5 years ago. That's what we're doing, and we're kind of proud and happy with that. I think that the job is we still have a long way to go to demonstrate the value that audience offers brands and advertisers, that comes back to measures of success. You know, it has to be valued.
Yeah, and getting it there. So I've got the sort of big broad principles. If I'm listening to this in terms of the things I've heard from you about, you know, responsibility, it's about ethics, not regulation. The fact we can do more together. Let's get down to the practical nitty gritty. Is there anything you think that people listening should literally be doing tomorrow? You know, what should they make sure they're doing, you know, tomorrow, across the next week, across the next month, as we go through this period of change? What specific takeaways should they take from this?
One question I would ask is, do you actually know, do you know where your digital advertising spend appears? That's one. And I know that most people probably do ask that question, but did you get the answer? And not, here are the top properties. Do you actually know kind of the answer to that? I think the second one is, do you feel confident that when third-party cookies disappear at some point next year, do you understand what your measures of success are and are going to evolve to, and how they're going to be met? And I know the answer to that question is probably almost certainly going to be no, because most people don't know the answer to that. But those are the questions we need to work towards trying to answer over the coming quarters.
What I'm also hearing is just that sort of it's a classic 21st century leadership challenge, really, that bit of being very prepared to talk about what you don't know.
Yeah.
And, you know, making sure that you are expressing the fact that you might not know everything about this, that it is quite a complicated area to look at. I think there's probably an openness for everybody to make sure that they you know, I mean, we've seen both from the poll, but from talking to people, we know that a lot of people are finding this a very confusing area, and it would be impossible to know all the answers, I think. So accepting that's probably useful for people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's okay to not understand. Just keep asking questions.
Yeah, and that we should feel optimistic, that actually what this leads us to is probably a better situation overall for the long term.
Yeah, and that's definitely the way that you know, I hope that people would sort of walk away thinking, which is, this is actually an opportunity. Even though change is being thrust upon us, don't see it as being a problem and it's a negative. It's not. This is actually a good thing. It's an opportunity to be able to do business in a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. And good, because it's always good to feel optimistic about it. And this is what knowledge gives you, and clarity, and your point about transparency and trust right at the start, that actually if we can work together and learn together in a way which it has got a bit more of that, we can feel optimistic that things will continue to evolve in a positive way. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Damon, for joining us and talking this through today. Any last thoughts for everybody in terms of optimism or next steps? Should they just continue to follow you in your what you're about to share?
Keep asking the questions, and by all means, contact us if you want to reach quality audiences in great publishing environments.
Brilliant, thank you, Damon. And we'll share your details in the chat as well. And just a reminder to everybody that we will be having a debrief session at 4 o'clock today. If anybody can join us for a coffee and to analyse this, because I suspect coming out of this session there will be more questions from people as well around this important thing. And thanks for the thanks that are coming through on chat to the panelists from everybody. Thank you so much to the Ozone Project, not just for speaking with us today, but supporting part of Digital Day. We're really, really grateful to all our headline sponsors, the Republic of Media, who've supported us so brilliantly as well, and Visit Scotland and Spey, everybody who's been involved in organising today and all these sessions. But this isn't the end of it all. We have got more later. So it is, I think, a brief break for everybody to digest all that food for thought and have some lunch as well. But we will be back at 2 p.m. today for a pertinent topic to follow on from. And Damon's already referenced this as well, the death of the cookie. What happens next? So thank you everybody. Thank you so much, Damon and the Ozone Project, for today's conversation. We will see you all at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Evie. Thanks, everyone.